Empaths are individuals who feel emotions deeply. They sense the moods, the energies, and the hidden pain of others. While this sensitivity is a powerful gift, it can also become a silent burden when an empath is hurt again and again. Each emotional wound leaves a mark not only on the heart, but also on the mind and identity. Over time, something profound begins to happen inside an empath. Their inner world slowly transforms. What once looked like softness can evolve into wisdom, boundaries, and emotional strength. An empath naturally absorbs emotions from the people around them. They do not simply hear someone's pain, they feel it. When someone is upset, angry, or struggling, the empath's mind and body react almost instantly. Their heart becomes heavy, their thoughts begin to race, and they feel an urgent desire to help, comfort, or fix the situation. In healthy environments, this can create deep connections, but when an empath is hurt repeatedly, their internal emotional system begins to experience a constant state of overload. Each painful interaction adds another layer of emotional weight. Because empaths tend to reflect deeply on experiences, they replay conversations and situations in their minds long after they happen. They analyze every word, every tone, every small detail, trying to understand what they might have done wrong or what they could have done differently. This habit of deep emotional processing can slowly turn into mental exhaustion. The empath is not only dealing with the pain of the moment, but also the emotional echoes that linger long afterward. Over time, their mind becomes crowded with unresolved feelings. Empaths rarely release emotions quickly. Instead, they carry them quietly inside. When hurt happens repeatedly, the emotional burden grows heavier and heavier. It begins to feel like their mind never truly rests. Even during moments of silence or solitude, their thoughts continue moving through past conflicts, disappointments, and misunderstandings. This constant interactivity drains their energy in ways that others may never notice. The body also responds to this emotional overload. Many empaths experience physical signs of stress, such as fatigue, tension, headaches, or difficulty sleeping. Their nervous system stays on high alert because they are always anticipating emotional conflict or disappointment. Even small negative interactions can trigger strong internal reactions because the empath's emotional capacity is already stretched beyond its limits. Another challenge during this stage is the empath's tendency to blame themselves. Because they are naturally introspective and compassionate, they often assume responsibility for emotional problems in relationships. Instead of immediately recognizing unhealthy behavior from others, they look inward first. They ask themselves whether they were too sensitive, too demanding, or not understanding enough. This self-questioning deepens their emotional exhaustion because they are constantly trying to correct themselves in order to maintain harmony. At the same time, the empath continues giving emotional support to others. They listen, comfort, encourage, and show patience even when their own emotional reserves are running low. This imbalance creates an internal conflict. Part of them feels tired and overwhelmed, while another part feels guilty for even thinking about stepping back. Their compassionate nature pushes them to keep giving, even when they desperately need emotional space. Eventually, the empath begins to feel a quiet but powerful sense of burnout. The emotional generosity that once came naturally now feels heavy and draining. They may notice themselves withdrawing from conversations or needing more time alone to recover their energy. The mind that once focused primarily on understanding others slowly begins searching for peace and relief from the constant emotional pressure. Repeated emotional pain gradually triggers a deep shift inside the empath's mind. At first, they may continue reacting the same way they always have, trying harder, giving more patience, and offering even greater understanding. They believe that if they just love more deeply or communicate more clearly, the relationship will improve. But as the same patterns of hurt continue to repeat, something inside them begins to question the entire dynamic. The empath's natural ability to observe emotions closely starts turning inward. Instead of only focusing on the feelings of others, they begin paying attention to their own emotional experience. They start noticing how often they feel drained after certain conversations, how certain people consistently leave them feeling confused or unappreciated, and how their efforts to maintain harmony are rarely returned with the same level of care. These observations slowly awaken a powerful sense of self-awareness. This awareness does not arrive suddenly. It grows gradually through reflection and emotional processing. The empath starts connecting past experiences together, recognizing that many painful situations share similar patterns. They begin to see that they are often the one apologizing first, the one making sacrifices, or the one trying to repair the emotional damage after conflicts. Over time, these realizations begin to form a clearer picture of their role in relationships. With deeper awareness comes a wave of mixed emotions. The empath may feel sadness as they recognize how often their kindness has been taken for granted. They may feel frustration as they understand how many times they ignored their own needs in order to keep others comfortable. At times, they may even feel anger, not only toward others, but also toward themselves for allowing certain patterns to continue for so long. These emotions can be overwhelming, but they also play an important role in the empath's internal transformation. During this stage, the empath's perspective begins to shift in subtle but powerful ways. Instead of automatically assuming responsibility for every emotional conflict, they start examining the behavior of others more carefully. They begin asking themselves whether the relationship is balanced, whether their efforts are being respected, and whether their emotional energy is being valued. These questions represent a major turning point in their inner development. The empath also becomes more aware of how their empathy has influenced their choices. They may realize that their desire to understand others has sometimes caused them to tolerate disrespect or emotional manipulation. Because they could see the pain or struggles in someone else, they ignored their own discomfort and continued giving chances that were never truly earned. Recognizing this pattern can be painful, but it also strengthens their understanding of themselves. As this awareness deepens, the empath starts developing a stronger connection with their inner voice. They begin listening to the subtle feelings that once went ignored, the moments when something felt wrong, the quiet signals of emotional discomfort, and the instinct that certain situations were unhealthy. Instead of dismissing these feelings, they start treating them as important guidance. This stage marks the beginning of a profound internal awakening. The empath's emotional intelligence, which was once directed almost entirely toward others, begins expanding inward. They start learning not only how to understand people, but also how to understand themselves, their limits, and their emotional needs. As awareness grows inside the empath, a quiet realization begins to form. Constantly giving without limits has come at a deep personal cost. For much of their life, the empath may have believed that love meant endless patience, endless understanding, and endless emotional availability. They often allowed others to lean on them in any moment, believing that being supportive meant never turning anyone away. But repeated emotional pain slowly changes this belief. The empath begins to understand that caring for others should not require abandoning themselves. This realization becomes the foundation for the development of emotional boundaries. At first, the idea of boundaries may feel unfamiliar or even uncomfortable to the empath. Their natural instinct has always been to accommodate others, to keep the peace, and to avoid actions that might make someone feel rejected. Because of this, setting limits can feel like they are being cold or unkind, even when the limits are completely reasonable. Inside the mind of an empath, there is often a powerful internal conflict during this stage. One part of them still wants to respond with the exact same compassion and availability they have always offered. Another part of them, however, has grown deeply tired from the repeated cycle of emotional hurt. This second voice begins reminding them that their energy is valuable and that constantly sacrificing their own well-being is simply not sustainable. Over time, this inner voice grows stronger. The empath starts noticing all the situations where their emotional generosity is stretched far beyond reasonable limits. They may recognize how certain people only reach out when they need something, but rarely show the same support in return. They start seeing how some conversations consistently revolve around another person's problems while their own struggles remain completely unheard. These realizations gradually strengthen the empath's determination to protect their personal, emotional space. As boundaries begin forming, the empath slowly changes the way they respond to others. Instead of immediately solving every problem or absorbing every emotional burden, they start allowing healthy space between themselves and the situation. They may take more time before responding to messages, decline conversations when they feel emotionally drained, or choose not to engage in conflicts that once pulled them in. These small decisions represent significant internal growth. Learning to say no becomes one of the most powerful shifts during this stage. For many empaths, the word no once felt almost impossible to use because they feared disappointing people or creating unnecessary tension. But as they continue practicing emotional self-respect, they begin to see that saying no is not an act of rejection. It is an act of healthy balance. It allows them to maintain their energy and protect the compassion that is truly meaningful to them. This process also helps the empath become much more selective about where they invest their emotional energy. Instead of spreading their empathy everywhere, they begin directing it toward relationships that are supportive, respectful, and mutually caring. They start recognizing that genuine connections do not demand constant, one-sided sacrifice. Healthy relationships allow empathy to flow naturally in both directions. As these boundaries strengthen, the empath experiences a gradual shift in their overall emotional stability. Situations that once overwhelmed them no longer carry the same intense weight. They feel less pressured to manage everyone's emotions and much more comfortable prioritizing their own well-being. Their compassion remains completely intact, but it is now supported by a much stronger sense of self-respect and emotional clarity. After experiencing repeated emotional pain, many empaths begin to develop a quiet but powerful form of self-protection known as emotional detachment. This change does not happen suddenly. It grows slowly as the empath becomes more aware of how deeply their emotions have been affected by constantly absorbing the feelings, problems, and conflicts of others. Over time, their mind begins searching for a healthy way to maintain peace while still preserving their compassionate nature. In the past, the empath may have reacted immediately to every emotional signal around them. If someone was upset, they felt personally responsible for helping. If someone was angry, they felt the tension instantly in their own body. If someone was struggling, they automatically stepped forward to carry part of that burden. This constant emotional involvement once felt completely natural to them. However, repeated hurt teaches the empath that responding so intensely to every situation can slowly drain their inner stability. As this realization grows, the empath begins changing the way they process emotional interactions. Instead of instantly absorbing another person's feelings, they start observing them more carefully. They listen attentively, but they do not immediately take responsibility for fixing everything. They recognize that some emotions simply belong to the other person and are not theirs to carry. This shift creates a small but important distance between the empath's internal world and the emotional turbulence happening around them. This form of detachment is never about coldness or indifference. The empath still understands pain deeply and still genuinely cares about the well-being of others. What changes is the intensity with which they allow those emotions to enter their own inner space. Rather than letting every conflict or negative feeling penetrate their thoughts and energy, they begin allowing emotions to pass by without fully absorbing them. During this stage, the empath's reactions become much calmer and more controlled. Situations that once triggered immediate emotional responses are now approached with greater reflection. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by someone else's anger or sadness, they pause and evaluate the situation carefully before responding. This pause creates essential emotional breathing room, allowing them to remain balanced even when the people around them are not. Another important shift is the empath's growing acceptance that they simply cannot rescue everyone. Earlier in their life, they may have believed that with enough patience, understanding, and emotional support, they could help anyone overcome their struggles. But repeated experiences of being hurt or taken for granted gradually reshape this belief. The empath starts recognizing that every individual must ultimately take responsibility for their own healing and behavior. This realization encourages the empath to step back from situations that once consumed all of their emotional energy. They may stop trying to mediate every conflict or solve every problem presented to them. Instead, they focus squarely on maintaining their own sense of stability. They learn that protecting their inner peace allows them to remain compassionate without becoming emotionally depleted. Over time, this detachment strengthens the empath's inner resilience. Their empathy remains present and active, but it is no longer uncontrolled or overwhelming. They become fully capable of understanding others while still maintaining a clear and healthy boundary between their own emotions and the emotions surrounding them. As the empath continues moving through cycles of emotional pain and self-reflection, their compassion begins to evolve into something much deeper and more refined. In the earlier stages of their life, empathy often meant giving freely and trusting openly. They believed that understanding someone's pain was always enough to justify endless patience, deep forgiveness, and repeated chances. Their compassion was entirely sincere, but it was often guided more by raw emotion than by clear understanding. Repeated hurt gradually changes this inner dynamic. The empath still feels the emotions of others, but their experiences begin teaching them vital lessons about human behavior. They start recognizing that not every expression of pain comes with good intentions. Some people seek empathy without offering basic respect, while others may unconsciously rely on the empath's kindness without taking responsibility for their own actions. These realizations slowly reshape how the empath applies their compassion in daily life. Inside their mind, empathy begins combining with true awareness. Instead of immediately responding with unlimited emotional support, the empath starts observing patterns much more carefully. They notice when apologies are repeated without real change, when promises are made but never fulfilled, or when emotional vulnerability is used as an excuse for harmful behavior. Their ability to read emotions becomes much sharper, allowing them to see both sincerity and manipulation with far greater clarity. This stage often brings a powerful shift in how the empath interprets the actions of other people. Earlier, they might have focused only on understanding why someone behaved poorly. If a person acted harshly, the empath would look for the hidden pain behind the behavior and offer immediate compassion. While this understanding still exists, the empath now balances it with a much stronger awareness of personal responsibility. They realize that someone's personal struggles may explain their actions, but those struggles do not justify repeated harm. Through these collective experiences, the empath's emotional intelligence deepens significantly. They learn to recognize subtle signals in communication, changes in tone, inconsistencies in behavior, or emotional dynamics that once went completely unnoticed. Their mind becomes much more skilled at evaluating whether a relationship is healthy, balanced, and respectful. This insight helps them navigate everyday interactions with much greater confidence and clarity. Their compassion also becomes far more intentional. Instead of spreading their emotional energy everywhere, they begin directing it toward people who genuinely value and respect it. They understand that true empathy is not meant to be limitless without any consideration for the giver. Genuine compassion thrives best in environments where it is appreciated and reciprocated. Another important change is the empath's growing ability to trust their own instincts. Over time, they develop a much stronger connection with their intuition, which often alerts them when something feels emotionally unsafe or dishonest. In the past, they might have ignored these internal signals simply in order to remain kind and understanding. Now they treat those feelings as valuable guidance rather than dismissing them. This transformation allows the empath to maintain their inherently caring nature while becoming much wiser about where their emotional investment goes. Their kindness does not disappear, but it becomes fully supported by insight, experience, and sound discernment. Compassion, once driven purely by feeling, now works hand in hand with deep understanding, creating a much more balanced and resilient inner strength. After moving through emotional exhaustion, self-awareness, boundaries, detachment, and wisdom, the empath eventually reaches a stage where a quiet but powerful inner strength begins to emerge. This strength is never loud, aggressive, or confrontational. Instead, it is calm, steady, and deeply rooted in self-understanding. The empath, who once felt overwhelmed by repeated emotional pain, slowly transforms into someone who understands their own value and emotional depth with much greater clarity. In the past, the empath may have relied heavily on the approval and emotional harmony of others. When relationships became tense or someone was upset with them, it created intense internal discomfort. They often tried to restore peace quickly, sometimes by apologizing even when they were not at fault, or by sacrificing their own needs just to keep the relationship intact. Repeated experiences of emotional hurt gradually change this pattern. Through ongoing reflection and personal growth, the empath begins realizing that their true worth does not depend on keeping everyone else satisfied. This realization greatly strengthens their core sense of identity. They become much more confident in their feelings, decisions, and boundaries. Instead of constantly questioning whether they are being too sensitive or too demanding, they start trusting their own emotional perceptions. When something feels wrong or disrespectful, they acknowledge that feeling rather than dismissing it out of hand. This trust in themselves creates a stable internal foundation that was not always present before. Another major shift occurs in how the empath handles conflict and pressure from other people. Previously, emotional manipulation, guilt trips, or harsh criticism might have deeply affected them. They may have spent long periods worrying about how others perceive them or trying desperately to repair situations that were never truly their responsibility. As their inner strength grows, these tactics lose much of their power over them. The empath becomes far less reactive to emotional pressure because they have learned to see these behaviors with greater clarity. Their communication style also changes for the better. Instead of explaining themselves repeatedly or trying to convince others to understand their perspective, they begin expressing their boundaries much more directly and calmly. They no longer feel the absolute need to justify every single decision or prove their kindness through constant emotional labor. This shift often surprises the people around them because the empath's quiet strength replaces the constant accommodation that once defined their behavior. At the same time, the empath develops a much deeper appreciation for true peace and emotional stability. They become increasingly selective about the environments and relationships they allow into their life. Situations that once felt normal, such as constant drama, emotional volatility, or one-sided relationships, quickly begin to feel draining and completely unnecessary. Their focus shifts naturally toward maintaining balance, authenticity, and meaningful connections. What makes this stage particularly powerful is that the empath's core nature remains completely intact. They still care deeply, still understand emotions intuitively, and still possess enormous compassion. The vital difference is that their empathy is now guided by deep self-respect. They are no longer willing to lose themselves entirely in the process of supporting others. This inner transformation creates a wonderful form of quiet power. The empath becomes someone who can remain kind without being controlled, supportive without being drained, and compassionate without being taken for granted. Their strength comes not from hardening their heart, but from finally understanding the immense value of protecting it.